The wheel of time turns, and ages come and go, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose in the mountains of mist. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning. The Wheel of Time turns and podcasts come and go. Welcome to WOTCast, a Wheel of Time book club, where we read through Robert Jordan's epic fantasy series and watch Amazon's upcoming Wheel of Time TV show. I'm Caleb Wimble, and with me this week are Catie Jarvis.
Hello, everyone.
Dan Katinsky.
Hello.
And Keeley Frank.
Hello.
You can find us at wotcast.net and support the show at patreon.com/wotcast. Your support means a lot. Even $2 helps, the Two Rivers tier. Join us on Patreon at the $5 Tarvalin tier, and you'll get access to special bonus episodes once we record those, where we talk about things like Wheel of Time short stories, graphic novels, video games, failed TV pilots, and more. Email us questions, comments, and corrections, because we will make mistakes, via contact@wotcast.net with the subject line questions. We'll answer those here on the show. For those unfamiliar, The Wheel of Time is an epic fantasy series about the battle between light and darkness, as seen this week through the eyes of a poor farm boy who just wanted to enjoy a nice bowl of soup with his dad. Last week we had our inaugural episode. It was such a smash hit, it broke the internet. I hit the upload button, went to share the episode on social media, and immediately half of social just collapsed. Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. They went down nearly the whole day. So I don't know, maybe the universe is trying to tell us something. That said, despite only being able to share the episode on Twitter, we got so many downloads the first day. We are grateful to all of you who listened and are listening today, and we're excited to have the word spread. This week, we're reading the first book in the series, The Eye of the World. We're continuing with chapters 6 to 10. But first, what else has everyone been reading or watching this week? Catie, I hear you've been watching Why the Last Man, which, as far as I know, is the new FX Hulu adaptation of the comic books of the same name by Brian K. Vaughan and Pia Guerra. Pia Guerra. Thoughts on that so far?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I did not read the comics, so I'm coming to it with fresh eyes. And it's... I think I'm up to date, which is about episode 6. So I'm kind of getting into the story now. And it's basically a dystopia about a world where all of a sudden everyone who is a man, or more specifically, everyone who has a Y chromosome just drops dead. And, like airplane pilots, the planes fall out of the sky and infrastructures go down. And more so than I even would have expected, the world is just pretty much, it goes dark. Literally, the power grid is down and the water is down, and everyone's kind of just fending for themselves. And it's certainly been interesting so far. I really like the political aspect of it. And I like to see just, the perspective of, okay, what is this going to be like, this female-only world? But something that I've been looking on the internet for any articles that discuss the violent nature of the show, and I haven't really found any. But it's interesting to me because, in my perspective, a world with only females would be at least a little bit less violent. But this world is still really, really violent, both in the political sphere and in the, just the people on the streets trying to survive. So I think that's interesting, and I'm trying to kind of decide how I feel about it. Another thing that's interesting about it is that the kind of two of the main characters that are being followed are the children of the person that comes to be president after the male president dies. Mm-hmm. And the male president was conservative, and the woman that comes to take over is liberal. and she's struggling, and the only surviving man is her son, and she has to keep him hidden because otherwise everyone's going to freak out and think that she basically did something to kill off all men to let herself rise to power, and she saved only her son. So that's kind of
interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, that's some of the political nature of it feels realistic to me, which is I think what I like about it, in a really dark and terrible way. And I'm not maybe the biggest fan of the characters, not the actors, but the characters themselves of the two children. They seem like a little like flippant, and they don't really seem to understand that they're lucky, I guess. So but maybe that's realistic. I don't know. Yeah, those are my takes on it so far.
And it's interesting you mention the pervasive violence being something that's taking you by surprise in there. And I kind of wonder to what extent that has been this defining characteristic for me of American post-apocalyptic fiction in the past couple decades, like especially around the Walking Dead era and thereafter. And I think Walking Dead, the comics were coming out, they started not long after Y the Last Man, or kind of like around the same period, but those came to TV way faster than Y did. And I did read most of the Y comics of the first couple years of runs, and then I stopped at some point. I have sort of felt that there is this really deep cynicism pervasive to this genre lately, especially the American, like almost this American prepper fantasy that no matter what, the moment the government goes down, all of us will just start to turn into murderous assholes who will kill anyone for a cup of soup, like just everyone. And that, at least in like The Walking Dead and things like it, and a lot of things like it, that every attempt at new society will devolve into war and death. There's like hardly any cooperation, no real community that isn't secretly full of cannibals or run by a psychopath at every turn. Does it feel like Y is kind of leaning into that trend of post-apocalypse?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it mirrors almost too closely The Walking Dead, and all the kind of little societies that are forming, even the ones that seem to give you like this little hope. You're like, oh, is this a good one? And then you see something where it's like, they're beating each other, and you're like, oh, nope, definitely not a good one. I don't know. I think the way you said it is exactly right. It's so cynical, and like maybe I just had this little hope that a female world would be like just the littlest bit less violent.
And you did mention that it was specifically like the chromosome. The Y chromosome is what is related to half the world's population getting wiped out. And in this version, which I don't think was true of the comics, am I right? From what I've read, they've updated the story in some ways. In that, for instance, there are like a lot of trans men still around in the world, but it's specifically that people don't believe they're going to be able to reproduce anymore. Kind of like children of men. Is that like supposed to be the driving fear that's behind a lot of the violence and like the collapse of social order in this one? Is that still like a major theme?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's a scientist that's a main character who does a good job of explaining the fact that like genetics is so complex that there are people that thought they were men or were women that had a different chromosomal makeup than they suspected, and they either lived or died. So I think that's interesting. But that scientist is specifically like trying to figure out how the world is going to continue producing. But it seems so far on episode 6 that most of the upset is just about the infrastructure and the government going down, and that's what most of the to-do and violence is about.
At the risk of being too obvious here, or I guess we're only just starting to get to this part of the books. There's a really interesting parallel in the vision that this story and Y is presenting of a world where women are in charge at the highest levels of power everywhere suddenly, but human nature maybe has not necessarily changed, or that there's something about the structures of power that are still causing all this war and violence to happen. And I'm curious if we'll come back maybe at some point, if you're continuing to watch Y and we're continuing to read Wheel of Time, to the parallels of a world where nothing quite like that happened, but we do have here, right? We already know there's been this apocalypse a long, long, long time ago. The aftermath of which was, what it seems in the prologue, was that all the men who could channel the one power went insane and destroyed the world. And now the only people who channel the one power and who have this sense of authority and control and the ability to tap into the magic of creation are women in Wheel of Time. And it'll be interesting to see maybe a little bit this week and probably more next time how this world is interpreting those politics and whether things are different around that.
I was just going to say, I'll be interested to see how the power structure continues to develop. Yeah, for sure, in the eye of the world.
Dan, I hear you have some thoughts on the new Broadway musical adaptation of Smash.
It's a good picture of like what bad writing can do to television. I haven't watched a show like that in a long time where plot lines are just forgotten in a few episodes, or even the next episode. It was extremely jarring. It's like, I don't know what went on in the writer's room or what happened with the production that like one of like the central plot lines they were building in the first episode around the protagonists, like the main two writers and like producers of the show, they just like forget about it in the span of like an episode or two. It becomes such a background thing. So it's like stuff like that was just super jarring. We finished.
So you're watching the TV show that has just gotten a Broadway adaptation. What is Smash exactly? Like what's the short?
So yeah, just for those that haven't watched or heard about it, it's a 2012, I believe, TV show based around the concept of two Broadway creators that have had success in the past, and they're working on a new musical based around Marilyn Monroe. And the whole concept is them trying to it's the workshopping phase and them trying to get this through the writing and the staging and everything and the performances. And it centers around two characters that are fighting for the role of Marilyn. One's like a woman from nowhere who has no background in Broadway but is super talented. And then one's like kind of a failed Broadway star who's like kind of a background figure and hasn't been able to get a leading role yet. And they're both fighting for that position. It's kind of, they're the central figures, but it kind of bounces around between these two women fighting for that role. And then the two creators, like the writer and the musician that are creating the story along the way and trying to put the pieces together in the workshop phase. So it became popular because the music is actually quite strong. It's a strange mashup between covers from like modern pop songs and such, and also like an actual musical in there, and they do the numbers. So I personally think the musical numbers from the Maryland show that they're producing called Bombshell are actually really strong, and I've enjoyed listening to them. They sound like right up Broadway's alley. But the covers are extremely weak, and they're just so generic that they seem very unnecessary, and they don't really contribute to any of the character development. So
what are they doing? Like things like Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend and like famous pieces that Marilyn did?
Not so. The Maryland stuff is all original content, so which is fascinating. So the soundtrack is like the Maryland music is made for the Broadway show within the show. So that's nice because it's original pieces. They flow really well and they actually contribute. So like while they're workshopping these characters, they try to do parallels. They're not always successful. Like the writers of the show, the actual like Smash show are not successful at merging the concepts. But essentially, there's supposed to be parallels between them writing and like the songs they're singing in the workshopping phase and what's going on with their personal lives. And it's really hit or miss. And especially with the cover music that's not related to the Maryland show, it often feels very tacked on just to have a musical number. So I do love musicals, and I think there's just it's really sloppily done. I know people love to, I was like researching reviews, and apparently people love to hate watch Smash as a term. So it's like people enjoy hating something so much they watch it. So it's like by the second season, apparently there's such a drop off in quality. My husband doesn't even want me to watch it, so he only wanted me to watch the first season, and that was it because he likes that. So a lot of mixed reactions, but people apparently like it enough that it is sort of getting a Broadway release next year potentially. But that's been in limbo, so who knows if they'll actually come out. But yeah, mixed bags all around, and I've just never seen writing that clunky. Like the protagonists by the end of the show don't actually grow at all. They actually revert back. Like the middle half of the show has character development, and then it like literally reverts by the end of season 1, so nothing really feels like no one grew. There's not a lot that goes on. But there's some good musical numbers, so it's definitely a mixed bag for anyone interested in watching something like a musical show they haven't seen yet.
It almost sounds like maybe we should just watch the musical numbers on YouTube. Would that be sort of an enjoyable way to experience the best of the show without watching the drama in between?
Yeah, they're pretty strong. So I mean, I enjoy them. I've gotten a couple. I don't know if it's just like the catchiness of the tune has been stuck in my head for a couple of them, but the TV show is really, really just background noise. There's not a lot of investment in any of the characters.
Well, Keeley, I hear you're a little bit more excited about things you've been reading this past week, 2 graphic novels in particular.
Yeah, so I love reading middle grade and kind of younger, kind of spooky books, and that includes graphic novels. So middle grade is before young adult. So there's like kids books, middle grade, young adult, just for context. Especially because when I was little, I was terrified of everything. And they, like, the guidance counselor tried to find books that I could read that would, like, showcase that, like, it's okay to be scared, instead of it just being, like, straight up goosebumps, which scared me. So I'm, like, going back into the kids section, finding all these amazing ones. And so I found 2 yesterday that I'm obsessed with. So there's one called Garlic and the Vampire by Bree Paulson. And it's literally about a little girl that's garlic, like her head is like a garlic bulb, and she works on a farm with other vegetables for a witch named Agnes, and garlic is just this anxiety-ridden, like, every day she panics, she's afraid everyone hates her, she thinks people are, like, doing things to make her mess up, like, she's so anxious. One day there's, like, smoke coming from the local castle, and so now there's a rumor that there is a vampire back in the castle. And they're like, well, Garlic, you should go. And she has to discover if she's brave or not. It is amazing. And, like, little girl Keeley is so happy to find a character that is anxious and spooky and, like, trying to do things in life. So I highly recommend that one. And then that one's pretty short. But there's another one called Death and Sparkles by Rob Justice. And it's literally a unicorn named Sparkles that's, like, a social media pop star. And then death. So he's literally going around and he's who gathers souls, but he hates the paperwork part of doing all that. Like, if he touches you, you die, but then he has to fill out a bunch of forms. And he's like a major procrastinator, and he's never been able to have a hug or do a high five or a fist bump because people die. And then there's Sparkles, who just wants to eat cupcakes and, like, be a regular unicorn, but has to work for, like, her manager and, like, do all that stuff. And Sparkles ends up coming to, like, an untimely demise, and that's how they meet. And then the 2 of them realize that, like, they're best friends. It's adorable, but I just love that there's all these things for kids that are, like, covering darker topics. Like, the whole beginning of Death and Sparkles is this section that says, like, death doesn't care if you're big, tall, short, small, young and old, 2-legged or 8. One fatal touch from the cold hand of death and your soul is shuffling off this mortal coil. And then there's a, like, I'll show you guys, you're not going to see it obviously, but it's spiders grieving another spider that died. And it said death can be many things: a sad experience, a sigh of relief, or a celebration of life. And I'm just like, oh, like, I wish that these things had existed, you know, when I was a kid. And I just love that people are making these now to open those conversations with kids instead of just being like, no, they're fine.
Those sound awesome. I'm writing those down. I'm writing those down so when my daughter can read, I can give them to her.
Yeah, they're so good. There's also another one that someone just started. It was kind of like a Tolkien-esque type thing where, like, I think he used to tell his kids the story and then made it into a graphic novel. But it's about Ham Helsing, who is a pig family, and so his pig family is known as vampire hunters, and he's always been kind of left behind, and then he has to come into his own as a vampire hunter, but he's a pig. It's like, these things are so ridiculously cute, but really dark, and I absolutely love that mix. So that's kind of reading. I've read a couple things this week, but those 2 definitely stand out.
Yeah, like you just made me, like, I forgot how creative kids' books can be often compared to adult books. Like, the creativity from just the descriptions you gave is so vibrant and interesting, and it's like, I sometimes feel like adult media is so lacking of that, and it's so kind of retread on each other, whereas, like, kids' media, there's a lot of, you really have to inject some newness into things and have, like, a lot of fun with the concept. So just crazy how, like, colorful, like, those descriptions you just gave are compared to a lot of, like, the dullness of, like, adult media that we're discussing.
Yeah, and it's been really fun reading books that are more lighthearted, but also kind of topics that I like. So like most of my books, nonfiction as well, are kind of like creepy or weird. But mixing in with like their little like vegetables is like so creative and amazing, and I definitely get a lot of joy out of them.
This garlic art is so cute. The garlic and the
Oh my
vampire
God.
panels that I'm looking at. She's so expressive in. I'm guessing this looks like it's probably this is an American or Western
Yeah.
graphic novel. Okay, but Garlic's face it's very manga like expressions.
Yeah.
A lot of it, like the sets that she goes through and the emotions and reactions.
She's a freelance artist that started focusing on webcomics. So apparently she has a webcomic, I haven't read it yet, for adults called Patrick the Vampire. But then she decided to do this kid's book, which is her first traditionally published book.
Very cute. I think I'm gonna have to check this one out as well. By Brie Paulson. I've been reading and watching a surprising number of things when I went back and reflected on it, because I really didn't think I had any spare time the past week and change. But it turns out I still did anyway, because my partner Eric and I rewatched the whole Matrix trilogy in prep for the new movie coming out. Kind of like we're doing with this podcast. And I had two big takeaways. One, which was that The Matrix had me thinking a lot about Wheel of Time, because it also fuses all sorts of religious symbolism. It has all these biblical names and messianic prophecies alongside Hindu and Buddhist concepts and continental philosophy that they're shoving in there left and right. And I say rewatch, but I should say I'm using that term loosely, because I realized in this that this was the first time I ever stayed awake through all of Revolutions, the third movie in the trilogy, which starts out really dull. That has not changed. It's like a really boring first hour of that film, and the ending, I don't think it quite gets there on the big Christ-like sacrifice that Neo winds up doing as the chosen one. Spoilers for a 20-year-old movie there, I guess. But I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed Reloaded this time, the second Matrix movie. So many of the iconic action scenes and fight scenes and chases I remembered being like Matrix things turned out to be Reloaded scenes, not from the first film, and they kind of blended together in my mind. And I wound up thinking the movie sort of amplifies all the strengths of the first movie. The fight choreography, this mix of Hong Kong movie style Jackie Chan martial arts meltdowns and Chinese wuxia films with the wire launches and everything, and these incredible, then hitherto hardly ever done slow-mo sequences where they were using dozens of cameras so they could circle all the way around Neo and everything. All that stuff is even bigger in Reloaded. There's Trinity just opening with the most incredible half hour of like the motorcycle out the skyscraper and doing all her incredibly badass stuff. And then you get that huge like hour-long set of fights and car chases in the middle. But then it also does the same thing as the first Matrix, where people will just not shut up for long stretches of time about a sort of sometimes very shallow read on the philosophizing they're doing. And it's a lot of interesting ideas. And the world itself is really interesting, the world building that the Wachowski sisters are building up there. But at the same time, it's just so much talking. And by the time it gets to the Merovingian, the Frenchman, and he's going on about free will and whatever that has to do with the orgasm cake that he's delivering to an unsuspecting woman in the cafeteria, which is just like a completely weird and bizarre tangent of a scene. That those are real where the weaknesses really stood out for me. And I guess I'll just mention in passing, we watched the HBO Many Saints of Newark follow-up movie that is a prequel to The Sopranos that just launched out, which I can't recommend to anyone. And everyone I know who watched it, who was a fan of The Sopranos, feels like exactly the same way. It just felt really dull and unnecessary and added almost nothing to it. And just, anyway, it didn't even feel really worth mentioning. And it sounds like a lot of us caught the trailer for HBO's new Game of Thrones prequel series, House of the Dragon. starring Emma Darcy, Doctor Who's Matt Smith, and many, many others. Oh, what do we think? Is anybody still interested in more Game of Thrones TV, or are we completely burnt out after that last season?
So I'll say that I am, to an extent, interested, because the Targaryens, I think for me, were some of the most interesting. If they did an entire series on the Mormont family, I would be way more involved. But because I love the Targaryens so much, I do kind of want to see what they're going to do with it. But I never read the Dance with Dragons, the last book that's since been, came out. And so I feel like there's going to be a lot of lore that I just don't understand, that I was able to keep up with the first show because I was reading the first few books at the same time. And then, my husband and I watched the trailer and he was like, "Oh, I wonder if it's referencing this event." What the hell are you talking about? Because he's watched all of those deep dive 40-minute long YouTube videos that connects everything. And I just don't have the energy for that. So I'll probably watch it and enjoy the fact that I know nothing that's going on. And then, watching Matt Smith in a really weird environment, I think is going to be fun.
With quite the wig.
Oh
He's
my
got
God.
the full Targaryen silvery white hair thing going on.
It's going to be interesting
I'm also
with his
watch
accent.
it. I think it's interesting that it takes place so far in the past. So I think that'll just be I like that. So it can all seem fresh and new, and maybe it will bring up some new interesting dynamics. Similarly to Keeley, I also didn't read the last book, which is funny. I mean, I don't even know why. I think I'm going to still. I just haven't done it yet. So maybe I can get myself to do it before the show, or maybe I'll do it alongside. I don't know.
All right, let's pick up with the reason we are all here. Let's dive back into the Eye of the World. This week we are reading chapters 6 to 10. Keeley, however, you picked up on some key details we forgot to mention last time. I think it was related to the reason Tam and Rand are even home in the first place, where we left them.
Yeah, so I realized that that's something we just completely missed, which was that they shouldn't have been home to begin with. They even said, typically when, is it Beltane? Whenever that festival happens, they stay overnight kind of in town because their farm is relatively far away. But because of what's happening in the world, or at least, their immediate world, they decided to go home. And so I flipped through to see what the specific details were. And on page 2, Rand and Tam are walking down this long stretch of road, going to the village, and Rand keeps looking over his shoulder and feeling really freaked out. And he says it's because the wolves have come down from the mountains and they're attacking all of the sheep. They're also attacking the men, and that also they're starting to see bears again for the first time. So clearly there are things happening that would give kind of a heads up to the reader that something is changing in the world, but it doesn't seem like any of them have made connections yet with what's going on.
And we did all mention that the winter has been lingering much longer than it should have, right? And we had some of the busybodies of the village, Kenbui in particular, being all snipey about Nynaeve and why Nynaeve, the village wisdom, said that they were going to have a nice short winter, but it's lingering on way too long, and we're about to have the big spring festival, and we're still having this real chill, holding on in the cold. Which is interesting, thinking of Game of Thrones too. The amount of the past 30 years, big fantasy fiction where seasons being off and something about weather patterns being a harbinger maybe of things to come. I don't know. Does that have anything to do with the moment we find ourselves living in historically, possibly, or is it a pure coincidence that it sounds so much like our own experiences, Dan, as you pointed out, in feeling very Pennsylvania-ish in these seasons that are around months longer than they're supposed to, or disappearing months before they should. They're just never showing up at all.
Very likely could be, but I feel like there's so much just around weather and seasons lately, so it does seem fresh on our minds with everything going on. Even this new sci-fi short film I was watching the other night was really focused around the environment and kind of the change there, so seems to be a trend, especially with this book and kind of just as you were mentioning, Game of Thrones and some other things going on.
So, Keeley, would you like to briefly summarize what happens in this chapter, Chapter 6, The Westwood?
Yeah, and real quick, I was like, right before you brought up Dan mentioning that's like Pennsylvania, I literally thought like he's treating Nynaeve as the groundhog. That's like, she didn't say there was going to be 6 more weeks of winter, and there is. So, just like that was perfect timing in my brain. So this, it was at this point that I texted you, Caleb, where, I said if anything happens to Tam, taking us all out. Well, he gets attacked because oh crap, what are they called? The Trollocs?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what they're called? Yeah. Have come through. He tells Rand, like, run away, I'm gonna defend us. And then Rand ends up getting his dad, and, like, finds him in the woods, and then creates some kind of, I guess it's like a sled. That's how I was picturing it, whatever he's dragging him on. And so he gets his dad on there, ties him down, and then realizing like he's seriously injured, starts dragging him through the woods towards the village. And Tam is kind of like in and out of it. Sometimes he's lucid, sometimes he's not. And then he just like drops this massive bomb about how like, hey, I might not be your dad. I might have found you, but I'm going to pass out again. And it's like life altering for Rand, but his dad's going to die. So who cares? Let's keep going.
Yeah, to that point, I just find it hilarious the amount of times, like, he drops that, and then it just goes into everything else, but there's so many points where Rand's like, he's my father, and it just keeps happening. It's almost, like, comical. Like, every time there's, like, the thought in his head or someone mentions his father, he's like, he's my father! It just keeps repeating, and it's a little... I know it's supposed to be serious, everything. He's like, traumatized by this revelation, but it comes off very comical.
It's like some serious denial. That's what I was feeling. I was like, oh, yeah, he's really struggling with his denial right now.
And in between the fever dreams, Tam is like, or in the fever dreams, I guess, as he's like babbling on about all the stuff he's seeing. And I guess that comes up initially because he's babbling on about Rand's mother. But regardless, he's going through and he's like mentioning something about a mountain and finding this babe and like, oh, we always wanted a child that he brings home from this war that he's in. But he's also like dropping huge lore bombs in general about this war that he was apparently involved in some way, despite that as far as Rand knows, his dad has never had anything to do with the war. He mentions Avendarosa. It said it makes no seed, but they brought a cutting to Carrion, a sapling. And he's going on about this, the tree of life that was brought to Carrion as a gift, it sounds like, and then grew for 500 years, and then someone named Layman cut the tree down, and then there was a blood war started over this. So we're getting a whole lot of detail here. I'm curious again, like are all this stuff, all this lore, because even though these are flashback fever dreams for Tam, that's kind of what he's doing. He's giving more of the world context here. Did all of this just get sort of completely overwhelmed by the revolution for Rand at this point and who he is?
Yeah, I think at least how I was reading it definitely did, where it was kind of like, as you're driving it down the road and you're just kind of like zoning out, and then you might see something weird out of the corner of your eye and like, wait, what was that? I don't care, I'm going to keep going. So that's kind of what it feels like, of like, they're just like dropping all of these hints, hoping that I'm going to remember any of this when they do any kind of big reveal. And, we were just talking about the Game of Thrones. We got so attached to those like lore moments just to be let down in the end. So I feel like, going into this, I'm just kind of like, okay, if they talk about that more, that'd be kind of cool. But his dad's about to die, so I don't really care about anything else.
Yeah, it does seem to be the more pressing concern here. So Rand is pressing on, denying the things he's hearing. You are my father, and all that. We get to chapter 7, Out of the Woods. Dan, what happens in this chapter?
So in chapter 7, Rand eventually reaches the village, and then to his shock, he finds it burning after an attack from the Trollocs, and this cloaked figure that was kind of leading the Trollocs to the village. The village wisdom, who I'm always going to butcher her name because I still don't know. Did we discuss this last week? This one specifically, is it Nynaeve? Nynaeve tries to I
believe
save...
it's yeah.
Oh yeah. So I'm going to keep butchering it, but I'll do my best to try to get it right. So Nynaeve tries to save Tam, but she's unsuccessful at this, and she says there's nothing that can be done and that he's too far gone. So Tam's getting worse, and Rand's freaking out. So then he thinks that the mayor can help, and then along the way, Moraine is revealed as like an Aes Sedai, and he's eventually able to like get her to help him by like her using her magic to help Tam. So she calls up the One Power to heal Tam, and he's by the end of the chapter, it seems like he's gonna make it through.
Yeah, some more revelations about the characters here. Yeah, I guess this is the moment we have confirmed that Moraine is an Aes Sedai for the first time, and I guess apologies if I made that clear last time through just not remembering that was something that is not really established for the characters, even though we do see like her serpent ring and everything. When Rand acts appalled about this, one of the characters, I forget who it is like, what did you expect they ran around wearing signs saying Aes Sedai on them or something like that, or had the dragon's fang tattooed on their forehead, which then also becomes all either right before or after that a plot point where somebody scrawls the dragon fang, which is like the black half of the yin yang or Tai Chi symbol on the inn door, and it's like this big sign of evil, right? Like you're marking the place as well. I don't know what we really find out about it here. Somebody throws around the term dark friend, and is here where we almost start to get like you can feel a mob forming around the fact that everybody knows who and what Moraine is now and what she's capable of doing around here. And they also figure out that Lan is a warder. They call him, right, at this point.
Yeah, he's definitely revealed to be one, and it's kind of any doubts the reader has by this point. It's obvious that these two are both an Aes Sedai, and Lan being a warder.
I thought it was interesting that everyone seemed totally fine with like the healing power that Nynaeve could use, but then when the Aes Sedai is going to use the power, it's like, oh gosh, it's like making a deal with the devil type thing. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting because there is already this culture of wisdoms in every village that have powers, but then
do they?
Oh, maybe not.
It's very interesting you say that. I'm just curious, like whether we've, because I think that's not said at all up until this point, unless I'm mistaken. But you have intuited something about the way that Nynaeve is doing her healing and like the poultices and herbs and bandages and everything.
I guess I was just making assumptions then.
Yeah, they did seem pretty complacent with it, but it kind of mirrors real life in a sense, so that didn't seem too jarring to me. But it is fascinating that you bring that up, Catie, because it's like, I don't know, I think about even like religions and kind of customs. We're so like, you think like, not to really bring religion into it, but like Christianity and like other religions, there's a lot of similarities, but then you talk to members of those different groups and they feel like there's like vast differences between them, but to an outsider it seems so subtle, and it seems like there's a lot of like connections there, whereas like in those organizations a lot of folks feel like there's like differences. So it's like that perspective there, and kind of like the tales that have been told. I think they even address that with like the height of the master or the dark rider or whatever that Rand's talking about. He was told they'd be like, what was it, 10 feet tall or something crazy, and he had different perceptions about what that would be, and then I think Lan corrects him on that and kind of the false misconceptions that they're holding to. So I think there's like supposed to be more similarities, and it's supposed to be more grounded than they realize, but I think there's this whole like mystical kind of evilness, or kind of like these tales have been really tall that they've heard and kind of just accepted as fact for like, or at least that's what they've all they've known for like so many years, so they just kind of, that's the worldview they have.
And speaking of like what these people are capable of and what Moraine is capable of, you had said something, Keeley, last time about really hoping that we get to find out Moraine is some sort of, like secret, powerful badass. Lo and behold, the thing that we hear that happened here at the village in the meanwhile was that she was calling down like ball lightning and throwing these big, I guess, balls of lightning rolling down through Trolloc ranks and everything.
Yeah, and so it was, I kind of feel like, just talking about the difference between Moraine and Nynaeve, whatever. that, Nynaeve kind of feels like a cottage witch to me, and Moraine kind of feels like the lady that comes into your town does like, it's all like those memes, like does a really simple magic trick and all the white men are like, oh, a witch. It's like, that's kind of how she feels to me. Can we talk about for a second though, they spent a decent amount of time talking about she's holding some kind of like itty bitty statue that like she took with her that has some kind of meaning or power, and I feel like I just didn't really understand what that was. Is that like where she's getting her power from? Does she like channel it through that? Is it like a good luck charm? Like, I don't know what that is.
From what I gathered from what we know, and Caleb probably has a lot more information having like read the series prior, but it's like an enhancer to her ability. So she like talks about they like lent it to her. So I think the guesses that I have are it's just like they have power and they can pull from this one power, but this talisman or like this little statue is like a relic of the past that they like an art form they used to have in making these, and it kind of just enhances their power. And there's so few that like it was, I remember her like saying that it was like she almost didn't get the council to give it to her on her travels, and she's like very thankful she had it because it gave her the ability. She mentioned she has abilities, but it kind of gave her enough strength to kind of like pull off what she did with the lightning and kind of warding off the enemies from the prior night.
The difference between reading this as a child and reading it now, the thing you just described, now I'm picturing Moraine like filling out the corporate laptop loaner form and going through the layers of bureaucracy in the White Tower to check out one of these Angreal, Len calls it, for travel purposes. I mean, I don't know if we can spare the resources this week. We've been under budget for so long, and like, do you really need it? I mean, you're going to the Two Rivers, right? All right, do you really need the 5G enabled device? Isn't the local Wi-Fi gonna be sufficient?
That's great.
I think what to me is an interesting exchange between Rand and Moraine, right? Because Rand goes to Nynaeve and he's like, please help my dad. And Nynaeve is in like full triage mode. She's helping dozens of people who've been like badly injured, burnt or everything. And she looks at him, and I think her conclusion is kind of just like this. He's deeply infected. He's got this really bad fever. I don't have antibiotics. I don't have penicillin. There's nothing I can do at this point. There's no like nothing I can dig out. I've got to go help the people in this emergency room who I can sew up or apply my poultices or whatever to get him healed. So Rand goes to Moraine after going to the mayor, and he's like, fine. And he seems to realize he has this moment where he's like fumbling and taking a deep breath, and then makes this promise: I'll pay any price in my power if you'll help him, anything. And then of course Moraine is kind of cryptically musing to herself, any price. We'll speak of prices later, Rand, if at all. I can make no promises. And and then, of course, talking about what the wheel wills, the wheel weaves as it wills, land, and all this stuff. So that fits in with the kind of some of the stories we've heard so far about Aes Sedai, right? Of be wary of making bargains with them. And this seems all in line with maybe, traditional European cultural understandings of what a witch is, and in Russian or Slavic folklore, going and making a deal with Baba Yaga or something, like, it's a bad idea, and that something is going to be demanded.
Yeah, I thought so. Just following up from last week's episode, it paints in. So all three of you seem to be a fan of Moraine, and I get why now, because all of you, I think you three had read 5 chapters more, so you had this context last week. Whereas she's such a more fascinating character now with this context and the way she's acting and everything. She's like the best character so far in terms of like she's interesting. She has like the way he describes her and the way she's the way she changes her appearance and kind of her mannerisms and all that, and the stoicness of that. It's very fascinating versus like the pixie view that she kind of gave Brandon. He even mentions that too, that she seems different after this. She's like weary, but she's still stoic in a sense. So it's like she's very fascinating, and I didn't get that when I first introduced to her. So I think it just painted in kind of like you guys had like a lens that I was like missing there. So I was like, why is everyone so into this character? Because she's just like the manic pixie that comes in with like this coin and then kind of leaves, and that's the only context. And now that's putting the pieces, like the puzzle pieces together, and like, okay, she's becoming a much more interesting character compared to like the general cast so far that we've met.
Did anyone else think of Moraine during the thunderstorm on Monday night when there was like these crazy cracking bolts of lightning in the sky. I'm from the East Coast, so I've been in many thunderstorms, but I've never experienced one here in Los Angeles. So I was like, well, I was just like, oh, this is interesting. You know, are there like forces at work right now? I'm not sure.
Catie, I actually texted Dan and some of my other siblings about that storm that started, where I was like, well, it's official. I'm a Southern California resident now because there's weather happening. And I am like, what the hell is going on? Like, nobody called for this. No one predicted this. It hasn't rained in 8 months or...
Right. And I'm thinking there's like magical forces at play because that's what it means when there's a thunderstorm in Southern California.
So that brings us to Chapter 8, A Place of Safety. Catie, if you would like to let us know what happens next in the story.
Sure. So Chapter 8, we have Moiraine and her warden Lan. They kind of give us an explanation of what's going on. The Dark One is hunting for boys the same age as Rand, Mat, and Perrin. And for this reason, Rand, Mat, and Perrin are going to have to leave Two Rivers, which is kind of a huge revelation and really scary for all of them. And I think that's just an interesting plot point for, you know, someone that never expected to explore far beyond the place they came from. And now, in order to preserve the safety of those that they care about and the place that they grew up, they're going to have to leave it. So, obviously that's a great setup for the adventure ahead, but it's also just sort of interesting to think about that, you know, some people are just born wanting to leave where they came from, and other people feel like they're going to be there forever, but maybe they're not.
And perhaps the one character who is desperate to get out of here and who wants to go along, we have not been privy to her perspective yet, and to what's motivating her to want to get out of here. So we kind of have her. Is it here that multiple characters show up who were not invited to flee, who are like, nope, we're coming along, right? Like the first one we have, they're having the secret conversation, and Tom Marilyn, the Gleeman, is like chilling, taking a nap up in the rafters or something, and just comes like tumbling down at this point here in Chapter 8, and I don't know if I'm getting a chapter ahead, but Egwene is also like showing up and be like, nope, I'm coming too. This sounds amazing. I am absolutely getting out of here. Then Aes Sedai has showed up and she wants to take y'all to the White Tower, and you don't want to do this? Like Rand's dragging his feet and just like has no desire to leave and everything. But Egwene is all about getting out of here. And I feel especially the moment where Tom like falls down out of the hay, that is such a Sam showing up outside the window of Bag End, where Gandalf is conferring with Frodo about how Frodo needs to go on the run. Like, we're still very much in Fellowship of the Rings territory here, right? And then, of course, Pippin and Merry show up too. Except here, we're learning quickly, apparently there is not a ring of power. It's more like these three teenagers are kind of the potentially dangerous object that need to get out of here, because they're going to draw the Dark One's wrath, or more Trolloc hordes down on the Two Rivers and all their friends and family.
I definitely thought also of the Fellowship there, and I think this maybe is one chapter ahead, but I liked how it kind of kept echoing that, like, well, I suppose this is all part of the plan, and this is part of the pattern. And so I thought that echo that intrigued me. I was like, okay, so there's this kind of sense that things are the way that they're meant to be, and that's like how the journey is going to proceed.
Yeah, but that's kind of like Moraine's whole deal so far, right? She is there. It feels very, very religious in a sense to me, but also this philosophy that she has of, it's not just that she doesn't dwell on the past, it's the moment things happen. Like the second something happens, she's like, well, that's happened, can't change it. Not time to to reincorporate that into the fabric of the universe as the wheel has laid out for us. And Lan, you can feel Lan getting like increasingly flustered and frustrated with like throwing his hands up in the air, like Moraine's just absolute go with the flow mentality for anyone that shows up and is like, I'm joining the Fellowship here.
I was gonna say it has a Buddhist ring to it. Just the like, I accept what is in the present and what is happening and things like that.
The serenity prayer of Moraine apparently and going off here.
Yeah, I think with the prologue too, I'm curious because she mentions the past a lot and the different ages. For some reason, I took it very literally. I think at one point they made it sound like there's like a reset, and I know we haven't gotten too deep into it. So like I literally thought like the world gets like almost reset, but it sounds like more so it's just different ages and different periods. And there's like a lot of repeating events, but I almost thought it was like a karma cycle where like the world or like the universe kind of resets. So I don't know if I was taking that too literally, and I can't tell because it's fantasy. So it could almost have like a karma element where characters are like reborn. So I don't know. I can't figure that out because it sounds like there's an element of that because there's this like dragon figure that's reborn constantly. But I can't tell if the universe has really reset or if just figures when they die come back. So I don't know the extent to that, but she's like constantly referencing different ages of the past, and they almost sound like very unique time frames and almost different worlds. So I don't know if it's just a fantastical way of describing past generations, but they sound very like individual and separate.
We also start learning from Lan here some things about the Dark One's minions. For instance, we learned that crows and carrion eaters are his spies all over the place, and that suddenly brings more significance to maybe some of those ominous portents we had earlier for all the ravens who are staring at Rand. And like at one point it's maybe Matt throws a stone at one and it just like hops to the side and won't fly away in the earlier chapters, which now seems, at least according to Lan here, maybe more directly like something's going on a metaphysical level there, not just like a metaphorical ravens as harbingers of death or rats or anything that he brings up, but as actual servants of the Dark One. And we also, in another Fellowship of the Rings echo where Moraine is talking about the healing of Rand's father, because I guess this is actually where she does it. We find out that he has been stabbed by a Morgul blade, a Shaiogul blade that carries with it a taint from that place, a stain of evil in the metal. So that, potentially why Nynaeve was not able to do anything about it. These tainted blades, she says, make wounds that will not heal unaided or cause deadly fevers, strange sicknesses that medicines cannot touch. And lets Rand know that this will devour his father if she doesn't, like at great risk to herself, undergo this like big healing process here. And this is where she brings up what others mentioned. And Danny said, we have lost the making of these, about the little statue, and how the Amerlin seat almost didn't allow her to take this one.
Yeah, well, and just for our listeners here, I think we are kind of jumping back and forth between chapters 8 and 10. So some of the stuff we're describing, Caleb, I think actually happens back in chapter 8, and then deciding to like head out happens in chapter 9. So we are jumping back and forth a little. So just for like kind of like if any of our listeners are getting confused, I think for context, a lot of what we've been describing is happening between chapters 8 and 10.
Which then brings us to a lot of the new things we're introduced to here. We sort of get a definition of what a warder is. And we've had physical descriptions of Lan before, and his curved sword and walking around before in his originally sort of like leather armor gear. And now he's busted out the chainmail. So it seems like they're basically this order of samurai who are attached to or dedicated to the Aes Sedai and the White Tower. I think this is where in chapter 8 we find out what a Myrddraal is, and that, maybe these things are a little bit different from a ring wraith in some ways, and we start to learn about how the Dark One might have created these half-men or any of the other number of things they call the Dark Riders. And we get reinforced a little bit about who the Dark One is and why people are afraid to say his name, Sheatan, years before the Voldemort stuff. All of which we talked about last time, which I guess I will summarize chapter 9, Tellings of the Wheel. This is a chapter where I think we know almost immediately that Rand is asleep and dreaming, or else he's been teleported in some bizarre way that immediately feels very dreamlike, of where a dark force that we then discover and he confronts as being the Dark One is chasing him over all these like blasted and blighted lands and huge scarred canyonscapes up to a beautiful white city. And he encounters this mountain as black as the loss is all hope, and it gets very poetic and very dreamy, and we have this moment of him outright challenging and naming the Dark One in this dream, and then the Myrddraal showing up in this palace that he enters into and being all ominously, "We have been waiting for you." And then he wakes up and Tam convinces Rand to run away with Moraine, and Tam gives him the Heron sword. And this is the moment, I guess, where I jump the gun on a bit of the village mob showing up to confront Moraine with accusations of being a dark friend. So I guess we had the evil eye symbol, but in this case the dragon's fang symbol scrawled on the door before to mark the inn for the fact that they were having Moraine stay there. But this is where the mob forms, and this is where we get the extreme Galadriel Gandalf moment of the villagers are gathering, everyone's getting all furious and out for blood, and like, get these witches out of here, blah blah blah, even though she just saved the village's ass and everything. And she pulls out her staff, and she like suddenly is looking and sounding like significantly taller and more imposing than she actually is. There's fire bursting out the ends of her staff as she's spinning around. And she does this whole like men of Manetheren, and giving this whole speech about who the Two Rivers people once were in prior generations, and another huge lore dump in a very Galadriel or Gandalf way of the old blood that still runs through them, and talking about all this very Silmarillion-esque lore of the 200 years of the Trolloc War raging, and these were people who lived here. Who were some of the most courageous in the world, and we learn about their queen Eldraine, who feels King Aemon die, and she's like a powerful wielder of the one power, and she just goes and burns out the entire Trolloc army at this point, or most of them, and then blows up herself in the process of doing it, and the city, this ancient city. And she goes through all this speech, and the fires wink out, and everybody is just like awestruck at what happened, and that seems to disperse the mob for the moment, and at least fill everyone with enough like confusion maybe over what all this was, and what this spiel they just got was, and who Moraine might be, and maybe also fear at being reminded again directly of what she can do. And this may be coming back to the whole old, well, if you really think a witch is that dangerous, do you really want to be coming up and making these accusations after you just saw her like hurling lightning down to destroy all these Trollocs? What do we think of this chapter?
I think there's another, like, we've been talking about the similarities between like Lord of the Rings and like other fantasy series with Wheel of Time. And I think like the dream sequence itself is a very Lord of the Rings moment. Instead of putting on the ring and seeing the Eye of Sauron, it felt so similar with like the dream he's having with, what's his name, Shaitan or whatever, Satan, essentially, pulling him in and telling him to like come to him. It just felt like Frodo looking at the giant like Mordor eye, kind of tracking in on him. So I think there's that the dream sequence is just one of many parallels again that we've been kind of discussing, just kind of stood out to me as like the Frodo putting on the ring moment.
I kind of have like a question. So I think they kind of talked about it, but maybe I just am dense and didn't get it. But like, why is Moraine here? Because people are like so surprised that she's here, and so like clearly she's on some kind of mission, and then when everything goes wrong, they're like, oh, we didn't think this would happen in the Two Rivers. Then why are you in the Two Rivers? Like, why were you here to begin with? Have they explained yet what she was actually doing? Like, how convenient that she showed up in this town with all these, teenage boys this dude is obsessed with.
Catie, Dan, do we know, or do we have any hints yet?
I'm not sure I have anything good. I feel like there was some hint in the chapters we went over last week, but I'm not actually sure. It seemed a little bit coincidental to me as well.
Yeah, I got that. It seemed coincidental because on one hand they were like talking about how like they were surprised by the attack, or like they didn't think that would happen, and she was surprised they were able to get the Trollocs out there. But then she gave the coin pieces to the three of them, and she seems to know about the desire for like the Dark One, wanting to get one of the three of these like teenagers that were born on like a similar date. So they seem to have some picture, like they seem to have some reason to know that Rand and these two others are important to the Dark One, but she hasn't really pieced together how she got that information. So I think she's mostly just surprised that they were able to get the Trollocs through like the border patrol, or like to that specific area. Yeah,
and that seems to come back to some of the geography we've had described. And again, I haven't looked at the map this time around, but we get the sense that the Trollocs are all up at like the north end of the world. They're almost like the, like the others behind the border in in A Song of Ice and Fire or a Game of Thrones, and there's all these constant battles going on up there, and we don't really have a sense of who it is that is guarding that border, but we do get the sense that is like, to get Trollocs here, they had to come down through a lot of countries, like a lot of like densely populated, occupied areas, and there haven't been Trollocs here in hundreds of years, I want to say at least 500. It might have been a much larger number that was mentioned here, like not since the Trolloc Wars. So I wonder, this is also the chapter or the set of chapters where we're learning a lot more about the possibility of dark friends and of regular human beings who have pledged themselves to the Dark One, which again sounds, that maybe sounds a lot more, less like a Lord of the Rings thing and more like a few years later, 7 years later, we'll get in Harry Potter, the Death Eaters, and, you know, all these folks who have aligned themselves with Voldemort for promises of immortality and power. And I think we start to get hints of that here. So my sense is that what we know is that Moraine was here looking for particular teens born at a particular time and expected the Dark One to be interested in them, but maybe she was expecting like regular ass human beings to be the threat here, spies and agents, and not necessarily an army of these hell creatures from a whole other part of the world where they're not supposed to be able to get beyond and have not gotten beyond for a long, long time. And that it seems mysterious right now that they've gotten here. But maybe we'll find out more about what's really going on and what Moraine hasn't told us, because we are informed here. I sort of glazed over it at several points. It might be Tam, or it might be the mayor who is like explaining to Rand, like, yeah, I said I don't lie. They're never gonna outright tell you a falsehood. But the truth that they tell you is also never the truth that you think it is, and maybe not the whole picture of anything. So maybe that bears out. Like, you know, even the fact that Moraine comes, we were talking about, Dan, like your perception of her before versus who she is now. She wasn't in disguise, right? She wasn't lying about who she was when she showed up, but she certainly was not disabusing anybody of the notion that she was just some rich, weird lady, traveling around and like overpaying everyone locally for menial tasks and flashing her silver coins around. But maybe we'll find out a bit more of what her agenda is in the next set of chapters. For now, we wrap up with chapter 10, Leave Taking. A very quick chapter. Keeley, do you want to describe what happens here in this one?
Yeah, so this is when everyone is kind of finally together and are deciding if they're leaving, and like feels like the story is like really picking up, which I think is why we kept bouncing between chapters, because it was pretty dull until chapter 6, and then everything happened really fast. So this is where, you know, Egwene and Tom kind of show up and they're like, I'm going with. And so they all decide that they're going to go. And it sounds like, did they split off into 2 different groups at one point? Or did I make that up? I felt like that kind of happened. And this is where they make the comment that, like, again, about the wolves. Like, oh, well, if I heard wolves, I'd know that there's no Trollocs near, but I don't hear wolves, i.e. Trollocs.
And we basically, they're getting on the road. They're like, okay, we need to get out of here now, right? Because there's definitely Trollocs close by. Even if there seems like a little bit of a logical leap there between the wolves don't like Trollocs, ergo no wolves equals must be Trollocs. But it seems good to be cautious at this point. You can understand why Lan is making that conclusion. And everybody's saddling up and getting out of here. And Egwene refusing to be put off that no, she's going on this adventure. Once again, it's part of the pattern. And we're heading out of here, and we sort of end with another really ominous portent, something flying above that I hinted at before. We get a name put to it now, another new type of monster. They call Lan growls a word, sounding as if it left a bad taste in his mouth. Drakar, or Drakar. I'm actually not sure of that one, but it sure sounds very much more of a Slavic type word or something akin to there than the sorts of names we've gotten so far, and something that Egwene asks about it, what it is, and Tom's like, in the war that ended the Age of Legends, worse things than Trollocs and half-men were created. So, you know, we're already escalating the scales of threat here. Like, we started off with these huge animal, men, creature things bursting through doors and smashing villages apart and murdering loads of people, and then we had the ring wraith like Nazgul type figures with the half-men, and now we're already finding out there's something even worse that's flying around here and hunting them down. And we're on the road, and the chase has begun, and I guess we'll find out what happens with that next time. We will be a little bit longer before the next episode rather than next week. It will be likely the week after because of an important sabbatical that we'll be taking for Dan getting married, finally, with a much roadblock put in the way this past year with all the world's events, which is awesome. So I'm really excited for you, Dan, and I'm really excited to be there. And that feels like a good reason for us to pause and catch up with some of our reading. When we do meet next time, we will be doing the next set of chapters. We will at least get through chapters 11 through 16 if you're leaving along. And we may even make it up through chapter 20. Some exciting stuff is going to be happening in these. We're really moving along here. Anyone have any final thoughts about what we've read this week?
I do have to say I liked the dream sequence a lot, and even though it was like a little bit cheesy, and I liked all the kind of lore drops that we're getting, and the fact that there's just so much after them at this point. It's very exciting. So I think it's a good set off onto the adventure moment.
Can we just talk about how drastically different the pacing became after chapter 5? I know we talked about it picking up, but it was such a chore getting through that, and now it feels like it's flowing like a normal book. But I was just like, is this going to be really dull the entire time? It's just it's almost like it's written by somebody else. I don't know why no one encouraged him to try to figure out how to condense the initial 5 chapters or fix the pacing, because it's such a roadblock to getting people onto the series. I was looking at reviews, and apparently people were dropping the book because they're I gave it 100 I read 100 pages and I gave it a chance, and if a book can't grab me by 100 pages, and then is it really 100 pages in? And then I looked, and it's it really is. And I'm we're past that now, but until you get to that point, it doesn't become as fascinating as it is with all the what Catie was mentioning with the lore drops and the cool kind of world development they're doing, and kind of just the Aes Sedai and kind of the power they wield. And it's getting really interesting and starting to show its flair and its uniqueness, but it took a god-awful long time to get there.
I can't disagree. Although I will say, having come back to it now, I have some thoughts on the purpose that this really slow beginning serves in the grand scope of things, and not just in the course of the series, but over this novel. I will be curious to see how we feel about it there. Once we've gotten to the end and we see where this fits into the whole, at least the first book story. Though I fully agree it does make for a slow start compared to what comes after, and compared to the kind of pacing we get here. Especially for people like you, Dan, who read earlier Ravens in certain editions of the books, and what that did to initial perceptions, because that's adding a whole another 30 pages on top of that, or something in that.
Yeah, that's fair.
Neighborhood.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that too, so that's fair. So most folks hopefully aren't getting that treatment before having to jump into the prologue.
So we will see you next time. This episode of WOTCast was produced by yours truly. You can find me at twitter.com/Caleb Wimble. Catie, where can people find you?
You can find me at katiejarvis.com or on Instagram at 30inLA.
Dan, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at PanzyDan. So that's PanZYDAN.
Keeley, can people find you?
I just had this conversation with a coworker. He's like, can I add you on social media? I was like, if you can find me, you can. But I do have an Instagram for the books that I read. I don't post every book that I read because I read a lot, but it's Keeley_reads. Mostly just the weird, creepy stuff I like to read.
Some of which I am looking forward to reading as well after your description of it. Remember, you can find us all at WOTCast.net and support the show at patreon.com/WOTCast. Your support means a lot, even if you're just listening, but even $2 a month on Patreon helps us keep doing this. Join us at the $5 Tar-Valon tier, and you'll get access to those special bonus episodes I mentioned when they come out. You can also support us by leaving WOTCast a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or your podcast platform of choice. This does help a lot, like I said last time, and we'll say again, it is the number 2 way we find listeners. The number 1 way, tell a friend about the show. Word of mouth means the world to us. That's all for today. Thanks so much for listening, folks. And remember, this is not the ending. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but this is an ending.
That's awesome. And I just washed your Pyrex, so it's perfect timing.
Nice. I hope the ice cream went down well.
It was very good.